I found my Bronze Star in the garbage can behind the garage on a Tuesday morning in November. The metal tarnished, but still gleaming through the coffee grounds and banana peels. My hands shook as I pulled it out, not from the cold Michigan air, but from something deeper, something that felt like betrayal cutting through my chest like shrapnel. "Danny!" I called toward the house, my voice carrying the kind of authority I'd used commanding troops in Afghanistan, the kind that made grown men snap to attention. But my 17-year-old son wasn't a soldier, and he sure as hell wasn't going to come running just because his old man was having what he'd probably call another episode. I stood there in my bathrobe and slippers, holding the medal that had cost me 2 months in a field hospital and a permanent limp, watching my breath fog in the morning air. The Purple Heart was there too, wrapped in an old McDonald's bag like it was trash. Like 23 years of service meant nothing. Like the scar running down my left leg from an IED blast outside Kandahar was just some story I'd made up to impress people at barbecues. The back door slammed, and Danny appeared on the porch, his dark hair hanging in his eyes the way his mother always let it. At 17, he had my build, but none of my discipline. All arms and legs and attitude, wearing those ripped jeans that probably cost more than my first car. "What's wrong now?" he asked, like I was some kind of burden he had to carry. Like I hadn't spent the last month fighting pneumonia that nearly put me in the ground, laid up in bed while he and his mother ran the house. I held up the Bronze Star, feeling the weight of it in my palm. "Want to explain why this was in the trash?" His face went white, then red, then something in between. He stuffed his hands in his pockets and looked everywhere except at me. "I was cleaning out your room. Mom said to get rid of the clutter." "The clutter?" I took a step toward him, and he actually backed up a little. Good. Maybe there was still some respect left in him after all. "This is clutter to you? It's just metal, Dad. You never even look at them anymore. They've been sitting in that box for years." Just metal? 23 years of service, 3 deployments, and watching good men die so his ungrateful ass could sleep safe in his bed every night, and it was just metal? I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake some sense into him, but my hands were still trembling, and I wasn't sure if it was from anger or the lingering effects of being sick for a month. "Get in the house," I said, my voice quiet now, which was somehow worse than yelling. "We're going to have a conversation." Inside, the kitchen smelled like the coffee Susan had made before leaving for her shift at the hospital. She'd been pulling double shifts lately, partly because of the medical bills for my pneumonia, partly because she couldn't stand being home with the tension between Danny and me. 17 years of marriage, and this was what we'd come to. Her working herself to death while our son threw away everything I'd ever accomplished. Danny slumped into a chair at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with homework when he was little, where we'd talked about baseball and girls and what he wanted to be when he grew up. Back then, he'd wanted to be a soldier like his dad. Now he looked at me like I was some relic from a war nobody cared about anymore. "Your grandfather fought in Vietnam," I started, sitting down across from him. "He came back to people spitting on him, calling him a baby killer. You know what he told me when I enlisted?" Danny shrugged, picking at a scratch in the table. "What?" "He said the country might not always appreciate what you do, but your family will. Your family will understand." I set the Bronze Star on the table between us. Guess he was wrong about that. "Dad, I didn't mean." "What did you mean then? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you waited until I was too sick to stop you, then threw away the most important things I own." He looked up then, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't expected. Not guilt, not shame, but something harder. Something that looked almost like hatred. "Important to who?" he said. "You never talk about them. You never tell stories about the war. Half the time I forget you were even in the army. I don't talk about it because some things are too heavy for kids to carry. I'm not a kid, Dad. I'm 17. I graduate in 6 months. And you know what? I'm tired of living in this house where we all have to pretend like you're some kind of hero when all you do is sit in your chair and watch TV and complain about your leg hurting. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been shot at by Taliban fighters, survived IED blasts that turned vehicles into twisted metal, but nothing had prepared me for hearing my own son talk about me like I was some kind of fraud. I never said I was a hero. You don't have to say it. It's in every look, every story Mom tells about how brave you were, every time someone thanks you for your service at the grocery store. And I'm supposed to what? Bow down and worship you because you went to Afghanistan? I stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. I went to Afghanistan so you could sit here in your safe little house and talk to your father like that. I went so you could have the freedom to throw away my medals like they're garbage. Nobody asked you to. The silence that followed was deafening. We stared at each other across the kitchen, father and son, and I realized I didn't know this kid at all. When had he become this stranger? When had the little boy who used to crawl into my lap and ask to see my army pictures turned into someone who could look me in the eye and tell me my service didn't matter? My phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Susan. Working late again, pizza money on the fridge. Try to talk to Danny. Try to talk to Danny. Like it was that simple. Like I could just explain away 17 years of growing apart, of me being gone for deployments when he needed me most, of coming back different and distant and probably not the father he'd wanted. I sat back down heavily, feeling every one of my 42 years in my bones. The pneumonia had taken more out of me than I'd admitted to anyone, including myself. 3 weeks in bed, burning with fever, wondering if this was how it would end. Not from enemy fire in some God-forsaken desert, but from a lung infection in suburban Michigan. "You know what the Bronze Star is for?" I asked, my voice calmer now. He shook his head, still not looking at me. "Heroic or meritorious achievement in ground combat against an armed enemy. You want to know what I did to earn it?" Not really. I told him anyway. There was a convoy that got hit by an IED outside a village called Schenk. 3 vehicles, 12 men. The lead vehicle flipped, caught fire. 2 guys trapped inside, unconscious, probably dying. The rest of us had taken cover because we were taking sniper fire from the hills. Danny's head came up slightly, despite himself. I could have stayed put. Should have, really. The smart tactical decision was to wait for backup, for air support, for someone else to handle it. But those were my men in that vehicle. So I ran through about 50 yards of open ground while bullets kicked up dirt around my feet, pulled those 2 guys out and carried them to safety, one at a time. Did they live? One did. Corporal Martinez, kid from Texas, about your age. Has 3 kids now, sends me Christmas cards every year. I picked up the Bronze Star, feeling its weight again. The other one, Private Chen, died on the way to the field hospital. 20 years old, never made it home to see his family. Danny was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Is that why you don't talk about it? Because someone died?" I don't talk about it because every time I do, I have to remember that I came home and Chen didn't, that Martinez lived and Chen died, and the only difference was which one I grabbed first. That's not a story you tell at barbecues, son. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where Danny used to play when he was little. The swing set was still there, rusted now and unused, but I could still picture him at 8 years old, pumping his legs and laughing as he tried to swing higher than the crossbar. "When I was deployed," I said, still looking out the window, "I used to think about this house, about you and your mom, about coming home and being a normal family." Like picture, helping you with homework, teaching you to drive, all the things dads are supposed to do. But when I got back, you'd grown up. You didn't need me the same way anymore. "Dad, let me finish." I turned around to face him. "I came back from my last deployment when you were 14. You'd been taking care of your mother, handling things around the house, being the man of the family. And I waltzed back in and expected everything to go back to the way it was before I left. But you'd changed. We all had. Danny was staring at the table again, but I could see he was listening. The truth was, I'd come back from Afghanistan carrying more than just physical scars. The nightmares had started almost immediately. Dreams about Chen's face as the medics worked on him, about the sound of sniper fire whistling past my head, about the weight of a dying man in my arms. Susan had tried to be understanding, but how do you explain to your wife that you wake up in a cold sweat 3 times a week, that loud noises make you duck for cover, that you can't go to crowded places without checking every exit? I'd tried therapy through the VA, but sitting in a circle with other broken soldiers, talking about feelings and coping mechanisms, had felt like another kind of combat, one I wasn't equipped to fight. So I'd stopped going, told Susan I was fine, buried myself in work at the auto plant, and tried to pretend that everything was normal. But nothing was normal. I'd come back from war to find that my son had grown into a young man without me, that my wife had learned to handle everything on her own, that the life I'd been fighting to protect had moved on without me. And instead of finding a way to fit back in, I'd retreated into myself, into the silence and distance that felt safer than risking more loss. Maybe I held on to those medals too tight because they were proof that I'd done something important, something that mattered, I continued. When everything else felt like it was falling apart, when I couldn't connect with you, when your mom started working extra shifts to avoid the tension in this house, when I felt like a stranger in my own family, at least I had those medals to remind me that I'd been somebody once. You're still somebody, Dad. The words were so quiet I almost missed them. Am I? Because most days I feel like a 42-year-old has-been with a bad leg and a son who can't wait to get away from me. Danny looked up then, and his eyes were wet. I don't want to get away from you. I don't know how to talk to you anymore. You're always so serious, so angry about everything. And when you get that look on your face, like you're somewhere else, somewhere I can't reach you, it scares me. The look? I knew what he meant. Susan had mentioned it too. The way I'd drift off sometimes, lost in memories of sand and heat and the constant threat of death. The 1,000-yard stare, they called it. I'd seen it in other veterans, had hoped I'd hidden it better from my family. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. I didn't know it was that obvious. Mom covers for you a lot. She tells people you're tired or stressed about work, but I know it's more than that. She's worried about you all the time. Work. The word hit me like a slap. I hadn't told them yet about losing my job at the plant 6 months ago. Hadn't found the words to explain that automation and cost-cutting had made my position redundant, that 20 years of experience meant nothing when they could replace me with a machine. The unemployment checks were running out, and Susan's nursing salary barely covered the mortgage. I'd been spending my days at the library or driving around town, applying for jobs that barely paid half what I'd been making, coming home and pretending I'd had a full day at work. The deception felt like another kind of combat, exhausting and ultimately pointless, but I couldn't bring myself to admit that I'd failed to provide for my family. There's a lot you don't know about what's going on around here. Then tell me. Stop treating me like I'm still 8 years old. I sat back down, feeling older than my years. I lost my job 6 months ago. That's why your mom's been working so much, why we've been fighting about money. The pneumonia just made everything worse. More medical bills, more stress. Danny's face went through several expressions. Surprise, understanding, then something that might have been guilt. Is that why you've been so angry all the time? Partly. It's hard to feel like a man when you can't provide for your family, when your wife has to work double shifts to keep the lights on while you sit at home sending out resumes that nobody bothers to answer. Why didn't you tell me? Because you're 17. You should be worried about college applications and prom dates, not whether your father can keep the house. Danny was quiet for a moment, turning the bronze star over in his hands. I threw them away because I was mad at you, he finally said. Not because they're not important, because I wanted to hurt you the way you've been hurting me. How have I been hurting you? By shutting me out, by acting like I'm too young or too stupid to understand what you've been through, by treating me like I'm just some kid instead of your son. The truth of it hit me like a slap. He was right. I'd been so focused on protecting him from the darkness I'd seen, from the weight of my own failures, that I'd forgotten he might want to help carry the load. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic on the main road. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw not the angry teenager I'd been fighting with, but a young man trying to understand his father, trying to connect with someone who'd been too afraid of his own demons to let anyone get close. I saw combat, Danny. I've seen things, done things, that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I came back with scars you can't see, and I didn't want to pass that on to you. But you did anyway. You passed on the silence, the distance, the feeling like there's this whole part of you that I'm not allowed to know. That's worse than whatever stories you're not telling me. He was right again. In trying to protect him from the war, I'd brought the war home anyway. The silence, the hypervigilance, the inability to connect, all of it had infected our house like some kind of poison. There was this kid in my unit, I said slowly, Private Morrison, 19 years old, from some small town in Kansas. Kid was scared out of his mind, didn't think he was cut out for combat. He wanted to quit, go home, face whatever consequences came with it. Danny leaned forward slightly, interested despite himself. But I saw something in him, some kind of potential he didn't know he had. So I spent time with him. Extra training, extra attention, helped him find his confidence. By the end of the deployment, he was one of the best soldiers in the unit. Made sergeant 2 years later, re-enlisted, made the Army his career. What happened to him? He's a staff sergeant now, training new recruits at Fort Benning. Sends me Facebook messages sometimes, pictures of his kids. Good man, good soldier, good father. You helped make him that. Maybe. Or maybe he always had it in him and just needed someone to believe in him. Danny nodded thoughtfully. Is that what you think about when you get that look? About the people you helped? Sometimes. But mostly, I think about the ones I couldn't help. The ones who didn't make it home. I walked back to the window, watching a neighbor's dog chase squirrels in their yard. Normal life, continuing around us while we sat in this kitchen trying to bridge 18 years of missed connections. You know what's funny? I said. All those years I was deployed, I thought the hardest part was being away from you and your mom. Turns out the hardest part was coming back and figuring out how to be a family again. Maybe we're figuring it out now. Maybe we are. The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted us. Susan coming home early from her shift. I looked at Danny and he looked at me, and for the first time in months, we were on the same side. Should we tell her about the medals? He asked. Let's tell her about everything. The job, the fighting, all of it. But first, help me put these back where they belong. We went upstairs to my bedroom, to the dresser where I'd kept the medals in a wooden box my father had made. Danny watched as I arranged them carefully, each one in its proper place. The Army Achievement Medal, I said, pointing to a bronze star with an oak leaf cluster. Got that for organizing a literacy program for local kids in Iraq. Taught them English, helped them learn to read. You never told me you did that. Like I said, some stories are easier to tell than others. I pointed to another medal. This one's the Combat Action Badge. You get it for actively engaging the enemy under hostile fire. How many times? More than I want to remember. Danny picked up a ribbon I'd almost forgotten about, a simple green and white stripe. What's this one? Army Commendation Medal. Got that one for something I'm actually proud of. What? I told him about Morrison, about the other young soldiers I'd mentored, about the programs I'd helped develop to support troops dealing with combat stress. Stories I'd never shared because they felt too much like bragging, or because they reminded me of a version of myself I wasn't sure existed anymore. Susan's voice called up from downstairs. Hello? Anybody home? Danny grinned at me. Ready to face the music? Ready. We went downstairs together, father and son, to tell Susan about our conversation, about the metals in the trash, about the job I'd lost, about all the things we should have been talking about months ago. She listened without interrupting, her face cycling through surprise, concern, understanding, and finally something that looked like relief. "So, let me get this straight," she said when we finished. "You lost your job 6 months ago and didn't tell us? Danny threw away your medals because he was angry that you won't talk to him about your service. And you two actually had a conversation about all this without anyone storming out of the room? That about covers it," I said. Jesus, Michael. She sat down heavily at the table, still in her scrubs, looking exhausted. 6 months? You've been pretending to go to work for 6 months? I've been looking for work. I couldn't find the words to tell you I'd failed. Failed? Her voice rose slightly. You think losing your job to a machine is failing? You think not being able to find work in this economy is some kind of personal failure? Isn't it? I'm supposed to provide for my family. I'm supposed to be the one keeping us afloat, not watching you work yourself to death while I sit around feeling sorry for myself. Susan reached across the table and took my hand, her grip firm and warm. We're supposed to be a team, Michael. That means when one of us is struggling, the other one helps carry the load. It doesn't mean you get to lie to me for half a year and pretend everything's fine. She was right, of course. She was always right about these things. That's what I'd fallen in love with 17 years ago. Her ability to cut through bullshit and see things clearly. Her refusal to let me wallow in self-pity or pride. "I'm sorry," I said. "I should have told you right away. I felt like such a failure, and I didn't want you to see me that way." "See you what way? As human? As someone who's struggling?" She squeezed my hand tighter. "Michael, I've been watching you fall apart for months, and I didn't know how to help because you wouldn't let me in." Do you have any idea how helpless that feels? Danny had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up. "I felt the same way, like there was this wall around you that nobody was allowed through." I looked at my wife and son, these two people who'd been trying to reach me while I'd been busy building barricades against the world, and felt something crack open in my chest. Not breaking, but opening, like a door I'd kept locked for too long finally being pushed ajar. "I've been thinking about going back to school," I said. "There's a program for veterans who want to become teachers. I could use my GI benefits, get certified, maybe teach history or something." Susan's eyebrows went up. "Teaching?" Danny suggested it, actually. And the more I think about it, the more it makes sense. I spent years training young soldiers, helping them figure out what they were capable of. Maybe I could do the same thing in a classroom. "That's not a bad idea," Susan said slowly. "It would mean going back to school for a couple years, getting certified. We'd have to figure out how to manage financially." "I could get a job," Danny offered. "After school, weekends. I know you don't want me to work during the school year, but if it helps." The offer surprised me. This from the kid who'd complained about taking out the trash? "You'd do that? If it means you stop looking like the world's ending every time a bill comes in the mail, yeah." Susan smiled at that, the first real smile I'd seen from her in weeks. "We'd have to downsize. This house is too expensive, even with me working full-time. But maybe that's not such a bad thing." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe we've been holding on to things. This house, your old job, the way things used to be, when what we really need is to figure out how to move forward." I thought about that, about the weight of this house and all its memories, about the pressure to maintain a lifestyle we couldn't afford, about the way we'd all been trapped by expectations that didn't fit our reality anymore. "There's a development about 10 minutes from here," I said, "near the community college where I'd be taking classes. Smaller places, but nice. Danny could finish high school at the same school, and it would cut our expenses in half." "You've been thinking about this for a while," Susan observed. "Yeah, I just wasn't sure how to bring it up." Danny leaned back in his chair, looking more mature than his 17 years. "I don't care about the house. I care about us being able to talk to each other without everyone being stressed all the time." Susan reached across the table and took his hand too, so we were all connected in a chain around the kitchen table. "What do you think? Really think? Not just what you think we want to hear. I thought about it seriously, imagining a smaller place, a fresh start, a chance to build something new instead of trying to hold on to something we couldn't afford. I think it makes sense. This house has a lot of memories, but most of the good ones are about the people in it, not the building itself. Just a house, Susan repeated thoughtfully. You know what? You're right. It is just a house. We spent the next 2 hours talking about practical things: when to list the house, where to look for something smaller, how to research the teaching program, how to tell our families about the changes we were planning. It felt good to be making plans together instead of just reacting to whatever crisis came up next. The conversation meandered through memories and possibilities, through fears and hopes, through all the things we should have been discussing for months. Susan told us about the stress she'd been carrying at work, about the patience she'd lost, about the way she'd been using extra shifts to avoid coming home to the tension between Danny and me. Danny talked about school, about his friends, about his fears for the future, and his confusion about what he wanted to do with his life. He admitted that part of his anger toward me had been worry that if I was falling apart, what did that mean for his own future, for his own ability to be a man in the world? As the evening wore on, the conversation grew more comfortable, more natural. We ordered pizza and ate it at the kitchen table, talking and laughing in a way we hadn't done in months. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward silences, still moments when old patterns tried to reassert themselves, but it was a start. When Danny finally went upstairs to finish his homework, Susan and I found ourselves alone at the table, surrounded by empty pizza boxes and the debris of a long overdue conversation. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Terrified," I admitted. "What if I'm not good at teaching? What if I can't handle being around teenagers all day? What if I get into the classroom and realize I don't know what the hell I'm doing?" "Then you'll figure it out. The same way you figured out how to be a soldier, how to be a husband, how to be a father. You'll figure it out, because that's what you do." "What if we sell the house and can't find something we like? What if Danny hates wherever we move? What if this whole thing is a mistake?" Susan smiled, leaning across the table to kiss me softly. "Then we'll figure that out too, together." I reached across the table and took her hand, feeling the calluses from her nursing work, the strength in her fingers. "I'm sorry I've been such a mess lately. The job thing, the health scare, feeling like I don't know what the hell I'm supposed to be doing with my life. I let it all get to me, and I took it out on you and Danny." "We all let it get to us. That's what happens when you're scared and don't know how to talk about it." "Maybe that's something else I need to work on, the talking part." "Maybe we all do." Later that night, after Susan had gone to bed, I found myself back in the bedroom, looking at the medals in their box. Each one represented a moment in time, a choice made under pressure, a piece of the man I'd become. The Bronze Star for risking everything to save my men, the Purple Heart for surviving what should have killed me, the Good Conduct Medal for doing my job with honor even when no one was watching. But maybe the most important medal wasn't there at all. Maybe it was the one I'd earned by learning to be the father Danny needed, the husband Susan deserved, the man I wanted to be when the uniform came off and the real work began. I picked up the Bronze Star one more time, feeling its weight, remembering the day I'd earned it. The heat and dust of Afghanistan, the crack of sniper fire, the weight of an unconscious soldier in my arms as I ran for cover. I'd been scared that day, more scared than I'd ever admitted to anyone. But I'd done what needed to be done, because that's what soldiers do. Now I was facing a different kind of battle, one fought in classrooms and family rooms instead of deserts and mountains. But the principle was the same. Do what needs to be done, even when you're scared. Even when you don't know if you're strong enough or smart enough or good enough, especially then. I closed the box and put it back on the dresser, then went to check on Danny. His door was cracked open, and I could see him at his desk working on homework by the light of his computer screen. For a moment, I just watched him, This young man who was somehow both the little boy I remembered and a stranger I was just getting to know. He must have sensed me there, because he looked up and smiled. "Everything okay, Dad?" "Everything's good, son. Just wanted to say good night." "Good night. And Dad, thanks for today, for talking to me like I'm old enough to understand things. Thanks for giving me another chance to get it right." I closed his door and went to my own room, where Susan was already asleep, her face peaceful in the dim light from the hallway. I slipped into bed beside her, careful not to wake her, and lay there thinking about the future we were planning together. A smaller house, a new career, a family that talked to each other instead of walking on eggshells. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But for the first time in months, it felt possible. The next morning, I woke up early and made coffee for the three of us, something I hadn't done in months. Susan came downstairs first, surprised to find me already dressed and moving around the kitchen. "You're up early," she said, accepting the cup I offered her. "Couldn't sleep. Too much to think about." "Good thoughts or bad thoughts?" "Both. Mostly good." Danny appeared a few minutes later, also surprised to find me up and functioning. "Are you making breakfast?" he asked. "Pancakes," I said, "unless you've got somewhere else to be." "I've got time." We ate breakfast together, all three of us around the kitchen table, and talked about the day ahead. Susan had a normal shift for once, Danny had a test in chemistry, and I had appointments to make, with the university about their teaching program, with a real estate agent about listing the house, with the VA about counseling services I'd been avoiding for too long. "You don't have to do everything at once," Susan said, reading my mind. "I know, but I've been putting things off for too long. Time to start moving forward." After they left for work and school, I found myself alone in the house for the first time in months without feeling like I was drowning. The silence didn't feel oppressive anymore. It felt peaceful. I made more coffee, sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, and started researching. The teaching program looked promising. 18 months of coursework, student teaching, then job placement assistance. The GI Bill would cover most of the costs, and there were grants available for veterans transitioning to education careers. I filled out the preliminary application, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The real estate research was more daunting. The market was strong, which meant we could get a good price for the house, but it also meant finding something affordable would be challenging. Still, I found several possibilities in the development I'd mentioned to Susan, smaller places, but well-maintained, with good schools and reasonable commutes. The hardest research was about counseling. The VA had improved their mental health services since I'd last looked, with more options for veterans dealing with PTSD and transition issues. There were group sessions, individual therapy, even programs specifically for veterans struggling with civilian life. I bookmarked several options, but didn't call yet. Baby steps. By lunchtime, I had a folder full of printouts and a head full of possibilities. I made myself a sandwich and called Susan at work. "How's it going?" she asked. "Good, really good. I've got appointments set up for next week, and I found some houses we should look at." Houses, plural? 3 of them, all in that development I mentioned, all within our budget range if we get what we're hoping for this place. "You've been busy." Feels good to have something to do, something productive. There was a pause, then Susan said, "I'm proud of you. For today, for yesterday, for being willing to try something new. I'm proud of Danny, too. Kid's got more courage than I gave him credit for. He gets that from his father." After we hung up, I spent the afternoon cleaning out my home office, the room where I'd been hiding for months, pretending to look for work while actually just feeling sorry for myself. I found stacks of job applications I'd never sent, printouts of positions I'd been too proud or too scared to apply for, evidence of all the ways I'd been stuck in place instead of moving forward. But I also found things I'd forgotten about. Letters from soldiers I'd served with, photos from deployments, certificates and commendations that reminded me of accomplishments beyond the medals in the bedroom. I'd done good work in the Army, had made a difference in people's lives. Maybe it was time to believe I could do that again. When Danny got home from school, he found me in the office, sorting through papers and throwing away the ones that represented dead ends and false starts. "How'd the test go?" I asked. "Pretty good, I think. Chemistry's actually starting to make sense." He looked around the office, taking in the organized chaos. "What's all this?" "Cleaning house, literally and figuratively." He picked up one of the letters I'd set aside from a former soldier thanking him for helping him through a difficult time. "This is from Afghanistan?" "Iraq, actually. Kid named Peterson. He was having trouble adjusting to civilian life after his discharge, so I helped him get connected with some resources, talked him through some things." "He says you saved his life." "I just listened to him and pointed him in a right direction." Danny set the letter down carefully. "That's what teachers do, isn't it? Listen to kids and point them in the right direction?" "I guess it is." "You're going to be good at this, Dad." The simple confidence in his voice meant more to me than any medal I'd ever earned. That evening, we had dinner together again, take-out Chinese food this time, but eaten around the same kitchen table where we'd started to rebuild our family the night before. We talked about practical things, scheduling house showings, researching schools in the new neighborhood, figuring out how to coordinate everyone's schedules during the transition. But we also talked about deeper things. Susan told us about a patient she'd lost that week, an elderly man who'd reminded her of her own father, and how she'd cried in the supply closet afterward because she didn't want the other nurses to see her break down. Danny talked about his fears about college, about leaving home when things were finally starting to feel stable again, about whether he was smart enough or strong enough to make it on his own. "You know what I learned in the Army?" I said, looking at both of them. "The strongest people aren't the ones who never fall down. They're the ones who get back up every time they fall." "Is that what you're doing now?" Danny asked. "Getting back up?" "I'm trying to. We all are." Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. The house went on the market and sold within 10 days, for more than we'd hoped. I was accepted into the teaching program and scheduled to start classes in the spring. We found a townhouse in the development I'd researched, smaller than our current place, but bright and modern, with a good school district and a short commute to the community college. The hardest part was telling our families about the changes. My father, a Vietnam vet himself, understood the job situation and the need for a fresh start, but my mother worried about us downgrading our lifestyle. Susan's parents were more supportive, having watched us struggle for months and knowing we needed to make changes. Danny's reaction surprised everyone. Instead of being upset about leaving the only home he'd really known, he threw himself into helping with the move, researching his new school, even getting a part-time job at a local grocery store to help with expenses. The angry, sullen teenager of a few months ago had been replaced by a young man who seemed genuinely excited about the future. "You know what's weird?" he said one evening as we packed up his room. "I thought I'd be sad about leaving this house, but mostly I'm just ready to go." "Why do you think that is?" "Because this house has a lot of bad memories from the last couple years. All the fighting, all the tension, all the things we weren't talking about. Maybe we need a fresh start somewhere new." He was right. The house that had once represented our dreams had become a symbol of everything that wasn't working in our lives. The mortgage we couldn't afford, the rooms where we'd avoided each other, the silence that had grown like a cancer between us. But the medals came with us to the new house. I set up the box in the bedroom Susan and I would share, but this time I left it open on the dresser, the medals visible instead of hidden away. Danny asked to hear more of the stories, and I'd been telling them, one at a time, sharing not just the moments of heroism, but the fear and uncertainty that came with them. The move itself was chaotic but oddly liberating. Packing up 18 years of accumulated stuff forced us to make decisions about what was truly important and what we'd been holding on to out of habit or sentiment. We donated boxes of clothes, sold furniture that wouldn't fit in the new place, threw away papers and knickknacks that had been cluttering our lives. "It's like losing weight," Susan said as we loaded the last of our belongings into the moving truck. "You don't realize how much stuff was weighing you down until you get rid of it." The new house felt different from the moment we walked in. Smaller, yes, but also somehow more manageable, more like a home and less like a burden. Danny's room was on the second floor, with a window that looked out over a small park. Our bedroom was smaller than the old one, but the morning light was better, and there was a sense of space and possibility that had been missing from our old life. I started classes in January, driving to the community college 3 days a week for education courses, child development, classroom management. The other students were mostly younger than me, recent college graduates or career changers in their 20s and 30s. I felt ancient at first, the old soldier trying to learn new tricks, but gradually I found my place. The professors were encouraging, especially when they learned about my military background. Veterans often make excellent teachers, one of them told me. You understand discipline, you know how to connect with young people, and you've seen enough of the world to give students perspective on what really matters. My favorite class was adolescent psychology, where we studied the developmental stages teenagers go through, the challenges they face, the ways teachers can support them during difficult transitions. I thought about Danny constantly during those lectures, about all the times I'd misunderstood his behavior or dismissed his concerns because I was too wrapped up in my own problems to see what he was going through. Adolescents are trying to figure out who they are, separate from their families, the professor explained one day. They often reject parental values, not because they disagree with them, but because they need to test them, to see if those values hold up under pressure. I thought about Danny throwing away my medals, about his anger toward my military service, and suddenly it made sense in a way it hadn't before. He wasn't rejecting what I'd done. He was trying to figure out what it meant for his own life, his own identity as a young man. At home, our new routine slowly took shape. Susan was able to cut back to regular shifts since our expenses were lower, which meant she was home for dinner most nights. Danny kept his part-time job, but maintained his grades, seeming to take pride in contributing to the family's financial stability. I studied in the evenings after they'd gone to bed, reading about educational theory and child development, preparing lesson plans for my student teaching assignment. But we also made time for each other in ways we hadn't in years. Weekend breakfasts that stretched into the afternoon, family movie nights, conversations that weren't about money or schedules or the latest crisis. Danny started asking me more questions about my service, not just the dramatic stories, but the everyday details of military life, the friendships I'd formed, the places I'd seen. "Were you scared all the time?" he asked one Saturday morning as we sat on the small deck behind our new house, drinking coffee and watching birds in the park. "Not all the time, but more than I wanted to admit. Fear was part of the job. It kept you alert, kept you alive. The trick was not letting it paralyze you." "Is that what happened here? When you came home? Did the fear paralyze you?" I considered the question seriously. "I think so, yeah. I was afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of not being strong enough for you and your mom, afraid of admitting that I didn't have all the answers. So I shut down instead of reaching out. But you're reaching out now." "I'm trying to. Some days are harder than others." It was true. The counseling I'd finally started helped, but there were still nights when the nightmares came, still moments when loud noises or crowded spaces triggered responses I couldn't control. The difference was that now I talked about it instead of hiding it, let Susan and Danny know when I was struggling instead of pretending everything was fine. Danny had started talking about his own plans for the future, considering colleges and career paths with a seriousness that impressed me. He'd always been smart, but now he seemed to have direction, purpose. He talked about studying psychology or social work, about wanting to help people the way he'd seen me try to help the soldiers in my unit. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told me one evening as we worked together on a school project about family history, about serving something bigger than yourself. "I want to do that too, just maybe not in the military." "There are lots of ways to serve," I said. "Teaching, social work, medicine, law enforcement. The uniform doesn't matter as much as the commitment." "Is that why you want to teach, to keep serving?" "Partly, but mostly because I think I'm good at helping people figure out what they're capable of. And teenagers remind me that the future is still being written, that there's always hope for change. Spring brought student teaching, and I was assigned to a high school 20 minutes from our new house. My cooperating teacher was a veteran educator named Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd been teaching American history for 15 years. She was tough but fair, demanding excellence from her students while never forgetting that they were still kids trying to figure out their place in the world. "Your military background will be an asset," she told me on my first day. "But remember, these kids aren't soldiers. They're not here by choice, and they don't have to follow your orders. You have to earn their respect every day." She was right. The first few weeks were challenging as I learned to adapt my leadership style to a classroom setting, to find the balance between authority and approachability that effective teachers need. Some students were immediately engaged by having a veteran as a teacher, asking endless questions about my service and hanging on every story. Others were more skeptical, testing my boundaries and my patience in ways that reminded me of some of the younger soldiers I'd trained. But gradually, I found my rhythm. I discovered that my ability to stay calm under pressure served me well when dealing with classroom disruptions or difficult students. My experience mentoring young soldiers translated well to helping teenagers navigate academic and personal challenges. And my knowledge of world events, gained through deployment and military service, gave me credibility when teaching about current events and international relations. The breakthrough came during a unit on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'd been hesitant to discuss my own service in detail, not wanting to make the class about me or to traumatize students with graphic stories. But when one student asked a direct question about what combat was really like, I decided to be honest. "It's nothing like the movies," I said. "It's hot and dusty and boring most of the time, punctuated by moments of absolute terror. It's about ordinary people doing extraordinary things because their friends depend on them. And it's about coming home and trying to figure out how to be normal again when you've seen things that most people can't imagine." The classroom was completely silent, 30 teenagers hanging on every word. When I finished, hands shot up around the room. Not just questions about combat, but about service, about sacrifice, about what it means to put something bigger than yourself first. That night, I called Susan from the school parking lot, so excited I could barely contain myself. "How did it go?" she asked. "I think I found my calling." "Tell me." I described the day, the questions, the way the students had engaged with the material when I connected it to real experience, real consequences, real people. "These kids are hungry for authenticity," I said. "They're tired of being talked down to, tired of being told what to think without being told why it matters. They want someone who's been out in the world, who's seen things, who can help them understand what it all means." Sounds like they found the right teacher. At home that evening, Danny was waiting up for me, eager to hear about my day. He'd been following my student teaching experience closely, proud of my progress, and curious about whether I'd really found something I wanted to do long-term. "So," he asked as I sat down at the kitchen table with a beer and the weight of a successful day on my shoulders, "are you going to be a teacher?" "I think I already am." The rest of the semester flew by. I took over more and more responsibility for Mrs. Rodriguez's classes, developing my own lesson plans, creating assignments, grading papers, dealing with parents. It was exhausting and exhilarating, challenging and rewarding in ways I hadn't expected. The students kept me on my toes, questioning everything, challenging assumptions, demanding that I prove why what we were studying mattered to their lives. They reminded me of some of the best soldiers I'd served with, skeptical of authority, but hungry for leadership, capable of great things when properly motivated and supported. My final evaluation was excellent. Mrs. Rodriguez recommended me for permanent certification, and the principal offered me a position for the following fall, teaching American history and a new elective course on military history and veterans affairs. "We need more teachers like you," he said. "Teachers who've lived in the real world, who can connect academic content to actual experience." The kids respond to authenticity. I accepted the position pending completion of my certification requirements. Walking out of the school that day, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my early days in the Army. The satisfaction of knowing I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. The graduation ceremony for the teaching program was held on a warm May evening at the community college. Susan and Danny came to watch me receive my certificate, along with my parents and Susan's mother. It wasn't as grand as my military promotions or award ceremonies, but it felt just as significant, maybe more so, because it represented not just what I'd done, but what I was going to do. "I'm proud of you, Dad," Danny said as we walked to the car afterward, "for going back to school, for changing careers, for being brave enough to try something new." "I'm proud of you too, for helping me see that I needed to change, for being patient while I figured it out, for becoming the kind of young man I'd want to teach." "Speaking of which," he said, grinning, "I've been accepted to state. Psychology major with a minor in education. Figured if my old man can become a teacher, maybe I can too." I stopped walking and turned to look at him, this young man who'd grown up while I wasn't paying attention, who'd found his own path while helping me find mine. "That's fantastic," I said, meaning it completely. "When did you decide?" "Watching you this year. Seeing how excited you get talking about your students, about the lessons you're planning, about the difference you're making. I want to feel that way about my work too." Susan linked her arms through both of ours as we walked across the parking lot. "Two teachers in the family," she said. "I guess we'll be talking about lesson plans and parent conferences at dinner for the next 30 years. "Could be worse ways to spend 30 years, I said. That night, after Susan had gone to bed, I found myself in our new bedroom, looking at the medals on the dresser. They were still important to me, still represented experiences and sacrifices that had shaped who I was. But they no longer felt like the only evidence of my worth as a man. I picked up the bronze star, feeling its familiar weight, remembering the fear and adrenaline of that day in Afghanistan when I'd run through sniper fire to save my man. It had been an act of courage, but also an act of love. Love for the soldiers who depended on me, love for the mission we were trying to accomplish, love for the country we were serving. Now I was facing a different kind of mission, one that would require different kinds of courage. The courage to be vulnerable with students who needed guidance, the courage to admit when I didn't have all the answers, the courage to keep learning and growing, even when it would be easier to stick with what I knew. I put the medal back in its place and picked up a photo from the dresser, a picture from Danny's graduation ceremony. The three of us standing together in front of the community college, smiling and proud and hopeful about the future. It wasn't a military honor, but it represented something just as valuable. A family that had learned to talk to each other, to support each other through difficult transitions, to find new ways to serve and contribute and make a difference in the world. The boy who'd thrown away my medals in anger had become a young man who understood what those medals represented, not just in terms of military service, but in terms of commitment, sacrifice, and the willingness to put something bigger than yourself first. He was going to college to study psychology and education, planning to spend his life helping others the way he'd helped me find my way back to the family I'd almost lost. Susan was working regular hours again, coming home each evening with stories about patients she'd helped, lives she'd touched, small victories in the ongoing battle against illness and despair. She'd found her own balance between service and self-care, between the calling that drove her to nursing and the family that anchored her to home. And I was going to be a teacher, standing in front of classrooms full of teenagers who reminded me why the future was worth fighting for. Not fighting with weapons and tactics, but fighting with knowledge and wisdom and the patient work of helping young people discover what they were capable of becoming. The medals would always be important, would always remind me of the man I'd been and the experiences that had shaped me. But they were no longer the only measure of my worth. I was a husband, a father, a teacher, a member of a community. I was someone who'd learned to serve in new ways, to find meaning and purpose beyond the uniform, to build a life that honored both where I'd been and where I was going. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, families settling in for the night in houses much like ours, facing their own challenges and celebrating their own small victories. Tomorrow, I would get up and go to work in a classroom, helping teenagers understand the world they were inheriting and their place in it. Susan would go to the hospital and care for people in their most vulnerable moments. Danny would go to school and continue preparing for his own journey into adulthood and service. We weren't perfect. There would still be difficult days, still moments when old patterns tried to reassert themselves, still challenges that tested our commitment to honesty and openness. But we'd learned something valuable, that families, like armies, succeed not because they never face adversity, but because they face it together. I turned off the light and got into bed beside Susan, feeling grateful for second chances, for the courage to change course when the first plan wasn't working, for the love of people who refuse to give up on you, even when you've given up on yourself. The Bronze Star would be there in the morning, along with all the other medals and ribbons and reminders of the soldier I'd been. But tonight, I was content to be just a man who'd learned to come home, not just from war, but from the isolation and fear that war had left behind. A man who'd found his way back to his family and forward to a future worth serving.